Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thanks as always for joining us this week. A lot going on. We had the big Rittenhouse verdict. I'll talk a little bit about that. Plus we have astonishing new documents about Biden's Afghanistan surrender and the cover-up. We have new major developments in our work to maintain cleaner elections, plus some interesting numbers on the Secret Service costs associated with Joe Biden traveling up to Delaware all the time. First up today is the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse, essentially for murder in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The left is angry. Those of us who support the rule of law are pleased with the ruling. I think it's a ruling that strengthens our constitutional system. It's a victory against what I call woke justice. When you watch that hearing or that trial, you saw the left at work in the prosecution, suggesting one didn't have a right to defend oneself from deadly violence. Attack on the Second Amendment rights of individuals, an attack on the First Amendment rights of individuals, a defense of rioting and race baiting. So that was a prosecution, in my view, that should never have been brought against Kyle Rittenhouse. And sure enough, the left has gone crazy after the acquittal. The jury has spoken, but that's not good enough. You have left-wing radical members of Congress engaged in race baiting, as I said, essentially inciting people by suggesting it's part of a white supremacist system, which of course is a defamation of America, defamation of the court, defamation of the jury, defamation of everyone involved in law and order issues in Wisconsin. And of course, it's a defamation of the American people. And then you have Joe Biden saying he's angry at the verdict. Well, I'm angry that Joe Biden's angry. I mean, it's just a ridiculous statement. Kyle Rittenhouse was there to help, and he was almost killed. And the only reason he fired those weapons was because he was being attacked. Every person who was shot was attacking Kyle Rittenhouse. So, this is, again, at least a temporary victory for the rule of law. And you can see why the rule of law is so important and why the left hates it. Because the rule of law gets in their way of their political agenda. And their political agenda here was to attack someone who dared to stand up to the violent left and protect themselves under law. And they didn't want that to happen. And they were hoping they could game the system, frankly, intimidate the jury. You had the left-wing media organization, MSNBC, NBC, caught following the juror van. How is that not jury intimidation or juror intimidation? But the intimidation evidently didn't work. So you're going to hear a lot of histrionics from the radical left. I hope there's no violent protest that arise from this. But of course, that's what the left wants to do. They like rioting. They like too often violence. They see it as a tool. But just take a deep breath. Look at the facts and the evidence here, and you'll see that it was a tragic situation in the sense that individuals died, but Kyle Rittenhouse was not guilty of any crime. And certainly, in terms of policy failures, the policy failure here is the left-wing politicians in Wisconsin who refused to deploy the police and/or National Guard early on in the rioting in Kenosha that would have prevented all of this from happening at all. It was anarchy, and when you have anarchy, these are the sorts of situations that arise, unfortunately. And we want to prevent that. We want to prevent that. So for all the politicians who are complaining right now because they're, as I said, doing their race baiting, engaging in kowtowing to the extremist rising communist left, if we want what the policy should be out of these politicians is law and order and rule of law. And when there's rioting and anarchy in the streets, you have to deploy the necessary police and law enforcement to protect lives and protect people from being injured, and obviously to protect property. And so I can't emphasize how important, I guess I could overemphasize it, but I think this decision was important by the jury, because if it had gone the wrong way, in my view, the Second Amendment would have been undermined, the First Amendment would have been undermined, the violent left would have been vindicated and invigorated, and your basic rights of self-defense would have been eviscerated. So this jury trial obviously was ended well for Kyle Rittenhouse, but its ramifications protect you as well. So you're going to hear a lot of commentary on the Rittenhouse trial and such, but let me just say one other thing. The judge, I thought, was great. I didn't agree with all of his rulings. But he'd been up there for almost 40 years as a judge, and that's the way we want judges to behave. And of course, the left hated that, because he was trying to apply the rule of law as best as he understood it. And sometimes it goes one way for the prosecutors or another way for the defense, and the left doesn't like that. And unless you're political, unless you politicize positions that are not supposed to be politicized, the left has no tolerance for you. So the attacks on Judge Schroeder are an affirmation on how good of a judge he ultimately was. So next up is some extraordinary documents that we received from the Special IG for Afghan Reconstruction, known as, I guess, SIGAR? I don't know. Anyway, it's SIGAR. I'll just call him the IG. And this was a special IG that was set up by Congress to monitor the reconstruction of Afghanistan, as the name implies. And they gave us documents the other day showing that the IG objected strongly to the Biden administration's order to scrub IG reports from the internet that they had come up with, detailing the not only the expenditures in Afghanistan, totaling, last I checked, was $146 billion in terms of training and equipment and things like that, but also waste, fraud, and abuse. And they wanted the internet scrubbed. And the IG objected to it. In fact, he said it violates the IG Act. And these are what the documents show. There was 120 pages of documents. Remember, now what happened? On August 16th, which was a day after the Taliban seized control of Kabul, thanks to Biden's unprecedented surrender, the official at the State Department's Bureau of the Comptroller and Global Financial Services emailed the IG, the Special IG's office, to inform them of the State Department's unprecedented request to suspend large portions of your website and public access to reports and records. And this is what she wrote, Ms. Dove did, as her name is Carol Dove. We request urgent assistance in identifying and temporarily removing and potentially redacting on a longer-term basis. So this would be a long-term scrub. All potentially sensitive and identifying information on U.S. government assistance programs, projects in Afghanistan. A great many of your historical publications contain extensive details about activities and partners that could put individuals at risk in this current environment. So Biden surrendered to the Taliban, and so information that would show, and this is one of the key things that the Special Inspector General was tracking, the type and essentially what military equipment we were leaving behind there. They wanted scrubbed, using security as the excuse. It was Carol Clay, who sent Dove an email, Matt Dove, and Matt Dove sends an email to John Sopko, who is the, quote, Special Inspector General. He's running the show there. And he says the bottom line is the State Department, some of the information in our reports could put individuals at heightened risk given recent developments. From my perspective, scrubbing our reports, and he capitalizes our, would be onerous and not timely. Consider the work to just scrub our published financial audit. So it would be a big deal. And he suggests, well, maybe one option is just to disable parts of the website. And he suggests that they consider working. Well, the boss said consider working with state, and the boss says no. SOPCO writes in response, "Do not take anything down until we receive an official request in writing." SOPCO notifies Dove that Clay's approval, and again, Clay is working at the State Department, of removing the reports is not sufficient. I want it from the secretary or deputy secretary, or as the minimum, her boss. She is a mere office director. What is the basis of her conclusion that reports that have been public for years are now causing a risk? I repeat, do not pull anything down until we get a better and more authoritative request. Again, he writes in another email, "Let me repeat, do not do anything on her request until and unless we receive something in writing from her boss or a senior political appointee. You can advise her if your prior mistake agreeing without further," because he says you made a mistake in clearing it approving it without clearing it with me, the IG. Pulling old public documents make no sense since they are available for years. It also violates the IG Act. And the IG Act is the Inspector General's Act. And I went and looked up the law, and you can look it up too. And I think what he's referring to is the IG Act generally makes it a requirement that IG reports, unless there's some serious law enforcement reason or other exceptions that you could probably take a guess at, need to be public. And once they're public, you can't make them unpublic. I mean, that's what he's referencing. One of the other things these documents show is that the Special Inspector General wasn't the only one, or the other agency, for practical purposes, who was being asked to censor documents. The GAO, according to one of the emails, temporarily pulled 424 reports from their site. I mean, that was a mass censorship. I've never seen anything like that before. So SOPCO writes again to his colleagues, again, noting it would be a violation of the IG Act. So in a subsequent email, a few days later, SOPCO again reiterates there's an issue with the law here, and he writes directly to the State Department. "This is a highly unusual request without any explanation or justification for why you're requesting that we review and delete certain documents that have been posted on our website, all in violation of the IG Act. Many of the records you are talking about have been on our web for 10 or more years, and my IT people tell me even if we delete them, they are still out there. In the internet, since there are numerous programs readily available that regularly sweep and capture such material, I prefer someone at State who is a political appointee explain in writing why you're making such a request, as what is the basis for the threat and how this very labor-intensive request will accomplish anything other than waste taxpayer resources." So this is John SOPCO writing this. This is the top IG, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan reconstruction. So finally, the State Department's controller, Jeffrey Mons, who was placed there by Joe Biden, he began January 20th. And he says, again, he reiterates that the State Department is concerned about the welfare of vendors and individuals who conducted work with the department and who have yet to exit Afghanistan. Identifying information regarding these individuals is well documented among your audit, inspection, and financial audit costs incurred audit reports. The department formally requests that you temporarily suspend website access to these reports until these individuals can safely exit the country. We acknowledge that the information has already been made publicly available, but we have reason to believe that this week's events represent extraordinary circumstances of heightened risk, and temporarily removing access to reports with identifying information could possibly shield some of these individuals from harm. The potential benefit of keeping state partners out of harm's way during these evacuations far exceeds the temporary loss of access to SIGAR reports, and we hope that you will help us do what we can do to make the situation safer for our partners. So their view is, and I fairly lay it out here, is that they had a security issue and they needed the reports, but the reports are public. And as I have highlighted, there were other reasons for keeping these reports secret, in the sense that there was the Biden administration was being humiliated with details about the military equipment being left behind and the cost incurred in training security forces, which of course which in large measure gets thrown out the window, and other support and security issues that we're paying for in Afghanistan. And this website was a core resource for those interested in figuring out what was going on. So sure enough, without telling anyone, they took the stuff down. So SAPCO caved and they took some materials down. I'm not sure if all the materials have been put back up because the process is secret. And I don't know if we've gotten all the documents in that regard. And as I said in our release, these extraordinary emails document a cover-up and unprecedented government censorship to protect Joe Biden from further humiliation over his surrender in Afghanistan. So I mean, what we're showing here to me is an anatomy of a cover-up. I mean, can you imagine if the Trump administration made a foreign policy decision that resulted in the disastrous consequences that we saw in Afghanistan, and he ordered people to take down public reports that could document just how disastrous that decision was? And the vague idea that somehow these audit reports, which are generally 30,000-foot reports, would put individuals at risk in Afghanistan doesn't pass the laugh test to me. And what I think is interesting about this case as well is that we got these documents straight up. We didn't have to sue for them. That doesn't happen very often. Typically, these types of documents we would have to sue for because the agency would ignore our requests, and we'd have to sue, and it'd be a year later, and we get some documents, and a lot of what I just read to you would have been withheld. So it seems to me the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction is angry and upset about what happened, and he wants the world to know about it. And Judicial Watch's FOIA request was an opportunity for that agency to tell the world about the misconduct of the Biden administration in Afghanistan. I've been doing this a long time, and I know when documents are typically withheld from us based on their content. And this is the type of information that is typically withheld. It doesn't have to be withheld because it's not national security related, but it's typically withheld because it's just what it is. It's embarrassing. And they don't want embarrassing material to come out. But this agency wanted the truth to come out, which I guess is one of the rays of hope and silver linings to this Afghanistan debacle, that at least one government agency objected to censoring material in violation of the law and wanted to alert people that what the Biden administration did was not on the up and up. So Judicial Watch is a national leader in the efforts to maintain and secure our elections, clean elections at least. And one of the ways we do that is by going after states that refuse to follow federal law, which requires states and localities to take reasonable steps to clean up the election rolls. Essentially what happens is if you don't vote, they're supposed to ask, why haven't you voted? And if you don't respond or vote within the next two general election cycles at the federal level, they're supposed to remove your name. That's one way of maintaining clean election rolls. We don't want old names on the rolls. People who moved away or died aren't eligible to vote in the jurisdiction being still on the registration list. It's an opportunity for fraud. Dirty election rolls can mean dirty elections. And of course, the Justice Department is certainly under the Obama administration, frankly, wasn't terribly interested in doing anything under the Trump administration because the left largely ran the Justice Department on these issues. And we know where the Biden administration is going to fall. The Justice Department had zero interest in enforcing this law. So as a result, our voting lists have been filthy. And it was Judicial Watch who came in and filed the first private lawsuits to clean up election rolls. We did it in Indiana and Ohio. We settled in Ohio. Indiana changed their law. And things got better in both states. And in fact, the settlement was upheld by the United States Supreme Court to the chagrin of the left, further confirming the process I laid out as being what is supposed to be done under law. And that resulted in a major lawsuit in California and Los Angeles County being settled with Judicial Watch. And they agreed as part of their settlement because their lists were dirty. They hadn't cleaned their list, best we could tell, in 20 years. LA County agreed to start removing names, up to 1.6 million names. They're in the middle of doing that now. We had a consent decree in Kentucky, a largely Republican-controlled state. They're removing at least 250,000 names. They said, oh yeah, you're right. We have lawsuits in Pennsylvania we filed. We had a lawsuit in Colorado we filed that was just approved by a judge to go forward. And we still have a lawsuit in North Carolina on this very issue. So we haven't slowed down in one bit. And in fact, we just speeded up again because we just sent warnings to 14 counties in 5 states to clean up their rolls or face federal lawsuits. So initially, when we began this type of litigation, you start looking at census data, you compare it to voter registration data, and you see that you have more people oftentimes you saw you had more people on the voting rolls than were living there and eligible to vote according to the census. And that was pretty good information in terms of giving us like a warning that, hey, there's something going on. They got more people on the rolls than are living there and eligible to vote. They're probably not doing their job in terms of cleaning them up. The census data isn't available yet this year, but there's other data that one could look at. And the data is material, registration material and information about their cleanup process that counties and states provide to the Federal Election Assistance Commission, which is a federal agency. So it's got to be correct. So we looked at these documents, we looked at this data and found that there were several counties, as I said, 14 counties in 5 states, that weren't doing their job. As we say, the letters detail how these states' own reported data show their counties removed absurdly low or an impossible number of inactive voter registrations under key provisions of the federal law. It's known as the National Voter Registration Act. And the letters threaten federal lawsuits unless the violations are corrected in a timely fashion. And you may want to know who the states are. The current states that we've warned are Arkansas, California, Illinois, New York, and Oregon. These are the numbers, or at least some of the numbers. In San Bernardino County, they have 1.294 million people on the rolls. And over the last 4 years, you know how many people they've removed for being inactive? Under this process I'm talking about? 14. Does that sound right to you? No. Sacramento County, California. Over 1 million people on the rolls. You know how many people they removed over the 4 years under this process? 0. Contra Costa County, California, 735,000 people on the rolls. You know how many people they removed from the rolls? Last 4 years. One person. Fresno, 500,000 people, well over 500,000 people, 573,000 people on the rolls. They've removed 2 names in the last 4 years. Stanislaus County, California, 356,000 voter registrations. 2 people over the last 4 years. Solano County, California, 338,000 people. 4 over the last 4 years. Brooklyn, New York, Kings County. So we're talking about New York City, all of the following here. 1.735 million people on the rolls. You know how many people they removed over the last 4 years? 0. Queens, 1.3 million. You know how many people they removed? 0. New York County, which is Manhattan, 1.2 million people there on the rolls. They've removed 2 people over the last 4 years. Inactive voters. I want you to think about that. In all of Manhattan, this data that they gave the EAC, they're telling them that only 2 people have become inactive and removable over the last 4 years. What a mess. Nassau County, New York, and Long Island, 1 million people on the rolls, 0. Bronx, 867,000 people on the rolls, 1. Richmond County, New York. I didn't know where. I was like, where is Richmond County? It's Staten Island. 344,000 people. 0. Now going over to Oregon. So I want to do that New York. Let's do this New York count. That's 1, 2, 3. Wow. Based on my hand count here, all of New York City removed 3 people from the rolls in the last 4 years. Monotma County in Portland, which is kind of Portland, Oregon. They have 500,000 people, 571,000 people on the rolls. They removed 5 people over the last few years. And Lane County, Oregon, 275,000 people on the rolls, 2 people. So the total of these counties, number of voter registrations is 11,848,651. And those counties in California and New York City and Portland and nearby have only removed 33 of those names from the rolls. Bob Popper, who is our senior attorney, you've probably seen him on our YouTube channel. He's a great guy. He's testified to Congress. He's director of our efforts to clean up elections. He observed that about 10% of Americans move every year. Those counties should generate hundreds of thousands of canceled registrations. So we're not talking like an argument, should there be 2 versus 10? It's a question of should there be 2 versus 50,000? There's simply no way to comply with federal law while removing so few outdated registrations under its key provisions. And again, and as Popper noted, and as I noted in the beginning, these are not our numbers. These are federal numbers that these entities, these state and county entities, reported to the feds. They came directly from state reports to the Election Assistance Commission, a federal agency. Now, Popper knows what he's doing. He was formerly deputy chief of the voting section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. So he used to litigate these cases for the United States. Now, we also sent letters threatening lawsuits against statewide election officials in Arkansas and Illinois on the ground that many counties in those states also had low numbers of statutory removals. So they have all these names on the list. People are obviously moving away, and the names are bad. They're ghost voters. They shouldn't be on the lists anymore, and they're not being removed. Now, hopefully, and I'm serious about this, they get our letter and they say, whoa, we'll press delete and the names will be removed. And you may laugh, but that's happened before. We did that in Pennsylvania. We have a lawsuit against certain counties in Pennsylvania. But we didn't sue Allegheny County because we gave them this notice letter that I'm talking about. And they said, oops, we're sorry. And they removed 69,000 names completely. So hopefully they do that and we don't have to sue. But if they don't do what we want them to do, we will sue. As I said, this isn't idle threat making. We've sued repeatedly. And why is this important? Well, it's important because you want your voting rolls to be clean. But it's doubly important because of, I think, the terrible policy of widespread and massive vote by mail. You're relying on these lists to mail out votes, to mail out ballots. Now, some of these lists, I don't know if the lists included, sometimes the ballots are limited to people who are only active voters. But I tell you, if you're not cleaning up inactive voters, their active voter lists are similarly bad in terms of having ineligible voters. You've got to have a kind of a system in place to make sure that you're able to remove people once they move away. And when you're just mailing everything, who knows who's getting these ballots if people have moved away? And if you don't have the security procedures in place, which virtually no vote by mail process does, in my views, as adequately, you're inviting voter fraud. That's why vote by mail is frowned upon by experts who know about voter fraud. Now, I know we're being told, oh, don't worry about it anymore. It's because the left likes it. So we're not allowed to talk about what we've been saying for the last 30 years on vote by mail, how it's a riskier way of voting in terms of providing more opportunities for voter fraud and voter intimidation. And if the lists are dirty, it's doubly bad. So more is coming. There are other states that got problems. I don't know if we're going to threaten to sue them, but we're going to tell them there are problems. So as Congress sits on its thumbs, or frankly just wants to undermine election integrity issues, as the Justice Department is suing states like Georgia and Texas for trying to strengthen election integrity, Judicial Watch is stepping up to try to make the next elections cleaner. I'm hoping we get names removed immediately. So hopefully, let's the material's available on our website. And if you're curious, you can ask your local county officials under Section 8 of the NVRA. You can look it up, National Voter Registration Act. You as a citizen have a right to ask for records about how they're maintaining the list. You can ask them. Do it respectfully and just do it. They're going to hate that I told you can do it yourself, but that's the law. So I'm ticked, but I'm also glad that Judicial Watch is doing this. And I get frustrated because I know if we weren't doing it, it wouldn't be done. It wouldn't be done. Our election systems are under attack. And this is an important action to at least maintain some integrity in our systems that are so under attack right now by the extremist left that want to undermine vote security, ballot security, election security in a way that makes it easier to steal votes and steal elections. So one of the projects that we've had over the years that began during the Obama administration is trying to figure out how much it costs to provide, to move the president around, both in terms of costs of Air Force One and Secret Service costs. Now, I know the president, quote, has to use a military plane to get around. He obviously needs Secret Service protection. But I think it's important that there be accountability for how much the presidency costs. And that if a president's traveling around for, vacation all the time and unnecessary travel, that we figure out what the costs are. So again, accountability. They work for us, and we have a right to know how much we're spending on their security, more or less. And Judicial Watch, I first took note of this because I remember reading, I think it was in the New York Post, that that Barack Obama, when he was first elected, took Michelle Obama up to New York for a date night because he had promised her a date night. And I thought, well, isn't that nice? So how much did that cost? You could have had a date night in D.C. But no, he flew up to New York. He flew up on a little jet, it turned out. It cost $29,000. We figured that out. And so what we did was we tried to ascertain Obama's unnecessary travel. So, I mean, if he was going on obviously government trip, we didn't ask for the numbers. But if he was going back and forth to Hawaii or on vacation and things like that, or political travel, we'd ask for the numbers. So we were diligent in tracking those numbers. And of course, under the Trump administration, we were diligent in tracking the Trump administration's numbers, or President Trump's numbers. Now, Trump, to his credit, when he was always going down to Florida, but at least it struck me that he was a madman in terms of working wherever he was. So he really didn't take vacations in the traditional sense that people like Obama did. And I'm not to say the presidents can't take vacations, but we have a right to know how much it's costing and whether we need to be spending all that money. Can we, is Air Force One, is it too expensive to ferry the president around? Is there a cheaper way to do it? I don't know. It seems to me if you're traveling close by, you don't need a big plane. You can use a smaller plane like Obama did. But those are the sorts of things, and you can debate it back and forth. But at least you have the numbers. And what was interesting is when we were doing the Obama numbers, there was zero interest in our numbers. But when we did the Trump numbers, I was on every major network talking about it. Shows you the dishonesty of the big media, doesn't it? So we didn't stop when Biden came in. We've been tracking the numbers. And of course, I say we're doing the numbers. It involved pulling teeth from the bureaucracy. There are two agencies that we had to sue oftentimes: the Department of Homeland Security, which runs the Secret Service. The Secret Service is a sub-agency, and then the Air Force. And they used to give us some of the numbers pretty easily without too much of a hassle. But then they evidently didn't like the fact that we were publicizing them, so they stopped giving us the numbers. I mean, and it was like they would ignore dozens of requests. So we had significant litigation during the Trump administration and tried to get those numbers. So we never stopped. Now, the Biden administration, the Air Force is stonewalling us, so we may sue over that. We have gotten certain Secret Service costs, and the latest numbers show that there was $2.2 million in Secret Service travel costs for President Biden. And it was only for, it looks like, a few trips. A trip to Wilmington, Delaware in August for a weekend, $175,000 in hotels, $18,000 in car rentals, $25,000 in air and rail travel. So that was $219,000, and that's just Secret Service costs. Another trip cost $110,000, so that was a little cheaper. Biden took a trip to Wilmington in July, $125,000. So it looks like the range is between $100,000 and $200,000. So, et cetera. So these are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trips. And there are a bunch of other trips that we've been asking for. The Secret Service has yet to provide records. And our guess is it would probably be about $3 million total in terms of Secret Service support for the president's unnecessary travel to Delaware. The Air Force, as I said, just refuses to give us the numbers. And this is not rocket science for the Air Force to give us the numbers, because what they do is every year or so, they assign a cost to the operations of Air Force One. And so every hour costs something, right? And like last year, it could cost $110. This year, it could cost $150,000 an hour. And next year, it could cost $75,000 an hour. So the numbers can vary a bit wildly. But anyway, the numbers are easy to come by because we're not asking for anything too complicated here. And they don't want to give us too much information about, like, say, who's on Air Force One. They used to do that. Now they won't do that at all. So those are the numbers for the cost of presidential travel. And again, this is the sort of basic work the media did for Trump, but they won't do for Biden. Isn't that interesting? And the New York Post gave it big coverage, but I don't think it appeared anywhere else. The cost of presidential travel is of obvious public interest. And as I said, it is frustrating that even after years of litigation through 2 administrations, it's now going to be a 3rd administration, the Secret Service and Air Force are still stonewalling this basic information about the costs of moving the president around. So again, Judicial Watch just does it all. And this is what, again, I hate to say this is what I love about Judicial Watch. We're in there trying to defend elections. We are out there trying to expose the worst foreign policy disaster in American history and exposing the dirty little secrets, covering up the dirty little secrets in Afghanistan. And then we've got this sort of basic nose to the grindstone work of just tracking travel costs associated with the presidency. Our Judicial Watch is great. And, I know we're coming up on Thanksgiving, and I wish you a wonderful Thanksgiving. And, along those lines, I am grateful specifically for the support that my colleagues and I receive from you and hundreds of thousands of other Americans. And I mean support. I mean people who write checks to us and donate to us. And I know there are millions more of you who support us spiritually or otherwise try to support us by getting the word out, or all three. And I'm thankful to all of you. So on behalf of my colleagues and I, my family and I wish you and yours a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving. I'll see you here next time on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update.